Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. 3 post-fight reviews for heavyweight fights on the Joet Gonzales and Isaac Dogboe card. So Guido Vianello returns from a year out of the ring. He looked a bit rusty, the jab was non-existent, but he put a beat down on Raphael Rios. So we'll cover that. Also, you had Antonio Mireles, the 6'9" prospect, and Colton Warner, the former Tyson Fury sparring partner. And I mentioned the Fury sparring partner thing because Warner seems to have adopted some of Fury's tendencies, and we'll come to that because I'm not so sure it's a good thing for him. But in terms of Vianello, so he'd been out of the ring for a year. He had a hand issue, surgery on that right hand. Also, there'd been an elbow injury to his left elbow, which had been sort of healed up, cleared up. And previously, he'd had a tune-up in 2021. A year before that, he'd had a controversial draw with Kingsley eBay, which arguably he lost. But he got a fortunate draw there. Basically inactive for the past 2 years aside from that one fight, and obviously having that injury to rehab. So this fight with Raphael Rios, effectively it was just a beatdown. Vianello, after that timeout, he looked a bit rusty in the opening couple of rounds. The timing really wasn't there. He wasn't sort of firing on all cylinders. The jab fell away. It looked like he just wanted to throw looping right hands, and the thing that encouraged him was he kept finding the target. Rios, who has a tendency to sort of dip down and also turn his head a little bit, was catching a lot of these on the side of the head, by the ear, sometimes slipping behind as well, but he had himself to blame for that. But Vianello, especially in round 2, started ramping up the activity, loading up something chronic, trying to get him out of there. The jab really just was an afterthought. Round 3, big looping right hands continued, but he was working in a few body shots. And at the end of the round, big flurry of punches, and Rios sort of grabbed onto him, tried to hold on as the bell ended up coming. You know, obviously, it sort of potentially saved him there because he was starting to look a little bit worse for wear. And all these big shots, these big haymakers that Vianello was throwing, a lot of right hands, starting to work in the uppercut as well, they were taking a toll. And ultimately, Rios just ate too many shots. He was starting to get bloodied up, he was getting bruised, he was getting battered, and ultimately a flurry of punches, started with some uppercuts, and I would say this sort of final sequence was over about 30 seconds, few uppercuts and then a little bit of a lull across the ring, but then it just poured it on, right hands, and then there was a big left hand to the body, drops Rios to a knee. You knew that he didn't want to beat the count, wasn't going to try to beat the count, and he didn't beat the count. By that point, the fight had sort of been beaten out of him. Guido Vianello returns, remains unbeaten, wasn't perfect, wasn't pretty most of the time, and he fell in love with the right hand. And you could have argued he could have actually thrown it a bit straighter because there was just this loopingness to it throughout the whole fight, and he could have and I think the thing that Rios probably hung around a bit longer than he did because he was seeing all this coming. He knew what was coming, he was bracing for it, and he was eating it. Ultimately, that strategy didn't pay off long term for Rios. Out of their inside 4 rounds. So it was what it was for Guido Vianello. Still question marks about him, how far he can go. Moving on to the next fight, Colton Warner, and that was against Jimmy Barnes. And no, not the singer. I know for some people that would never have heard of Jimmy Barnes, but do YouTube it if you haven't heard of him. In terms of this fight, you had Colton Warner, the height, the reach, clearly the skill gap, but it just wasn't quite clicking. He seemed to be more interested with how he looked at times rather than, going with a work rate that was going to tire out his man and get him out of there. So this one went all 4 rounds, and it was 40-36 to Colton Warner, but this should have been ended because Warner had it all over his opponent Jimmy Barnes, and he was catching him, pot-shotting him, but there was a work rate problem. There just wasn't enough work. He was sort of standing off, pot-shotting, sometimes sort of playing the clown, sort of playing up to the audience with, but he hadn't really done enough to justify sort of clowning it up a little bit, considering that his opponent was still landing on him. There were some shots coming in, left hooks, and with the dangerously low left hand, the odd right hand from Jimmy Barnes was finding the target. A couple of really nice left hooks as well. And you saw that Barnes was absolutely gassed after about 3 rounds, or midway through 3 rounds. If Colton Warner had have actually, instead of posturing, preening, trying to look like his former sparring partner Tyson Fury, because you can tell he's modeled some of his style on Fury. But Colton Warner's not 6'9". He doesn't have a high work rate. He wasn't necessarily that defensively responsible. He is very Tyson Fury light, and it probably is in his best interest if he does actually have a bit more defensive responsibility and works a little bit harder in there, because that could have been a stoppage in there which would have been good for him, good for the record, and would have been potentially a highlight reel stoppage. But ultimately, the lack of work saw this one go the distance. So I wasn't necessarily that impressed. You can tell Warner does have some skills. He does have some ability. He can probably fight at, maybe a top 40 or a top 50 level. I mean, that's sort of where I would project it at this point. But above that, he'll get found out, because his defense with the low left hand, I mean, if you've got a much shorter journeyman catching you with shots, that is a red flag for the future. And not just one shot, but repeatedly. So you have to ask questions about the boxing IQ. But obviously, against this opponent, he didn't seem to mind too much about what was coming back. But there was a chance to really put it on him, make a statement, shine. Just don't think he did that. What did you make of that performance? And also the young prospect Antonio Mireles, 6'9". Big height and reach disparity in this one. He was largely sort of working from the outside, sometimes got drawn into some close quarters action, and you did have him in that first round with his opponent Dennys Reyes. Reyes was actually spirited, came forward and was landing some shots, some jabs, marking up the right eye of Antonio Mireles, and you can see here on screen that's what it looked like after the first round. So he was finding a home for it, connecting with the jab and also some right hands. But the weight of the punches of the much bigger man, the work rate just wore him down. And ultimately, he was dropped twice in the fight. In the second round, a flurry of punches with a body shot on the end was the first knockdown. And the second knockdown, a very nice right hook that was preceded by a few other punches, had him down, and he was counted out. Well, should I say it was waved off. The referee had seen enough. So another win for Morelis, goes to 4-0. There's some raw ingredients there, and he looked like he really wanted to put it on his opponent. He was working hard. That work rate was high in comparison to Colton Warner, who coasted. And yeah, I think Morelis, much higher ceiling that I would project for Warner, but obviously he's a project. He's sort of 4 or 5 years away from being at any real level. I guess in terms of Vianello, still question marks. I don't know how far he can go. I've always had a question mark about him. What did you make of the performance? How far do you think Vianello can go? What did you make of Warner? What did you make of Mireles? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.